The ransom note was written in 3 languages: English, French, Russian. But Audrey Hepburn only needed to read the first line to understand that her son was gone. "We have Sean, 10 million Swiss francs, or you never see him again." February 8th, 1970, the Swiss Alps. Audrey's secluded estate in Tolochenaz, a fortress of privacy where she'd retreated after years of Hollywood scrutiny, where she thought her children would be safe from the world that had consumed her life for 2 decades, where she'd been catastrophically wrong. The house staff had found the note pinned to the front door at dawn. No footprints in the snow. No witnesses, no trace of how it had gotten there, just a piece of paper that had turned Audrey's carefully constructed sanctuary into a nightmare. Sean was 16 years old, Audrey's firstborn with Mel Ferrer, a boy who'd inherited his mother's elegance and his father's intensity. He'd been walking to the village school as he did every morning, a 2-mile trek through the Swiss countryside that he'd made hundreds of times. Safe, routine, predictable, until yesterday, when he'd never arrived. The local Swiss police had been polite but pessimistic. Missing teenagers often ran away. Perhaps Sean had gotten involved with the wrong crowd. Perhaps he'd gone to Geneva or Zurich for excitement. These things usually resolved themselves within a few days, but Audrey had known immediately that something was wrong. Sean was responsible, careful, devoted to his family. He would never disappear without warning. And now, holding the ransom note in her trembling hands, she understood exactly what had happened to her son. The note was typed on expensive paper, watermarked and thick, professional, the kind of stationery that suggested serious people with serious resources. The demands were specific: 10 million Swiss francs in unmarked bills delivered to a location that would be specified later. No police, no publicity, no deviation from instructions, and at the bottom, in handwriting that made Audrey's blood run cold: "We know who you are, Miss Hepburn. We know what you're worth. Pay, or your son disappears forever." It was signed with a single word in Cyrillic script: Bratva, the Russian Mafia. Subscribe now. This story is about to take an incredible turn. Audrey sat in her drawing room, the note spread on the antique table before her, trying to understand how her life had led to this moment. How the choices she'd made, the fame she'd achieved, the privacy she'd sought, had somehow painted a target on her family. The Bratva wasn't just organized crime. They were an empire built on violence and fear, with connections stretching from Moscow to New York to the banking centers of Switzerland. They dealt in arms, drugs, human trafficking, and kidnapping on a scale that dwarfed traditional crime families. And somehow they'd decided that Audrey Hepburn's son was worth 10 million francs. The phone rang. Audrey's hand shook as she answered. "Miss Hepburn?" The voice was accented, controlled, terrifyingly calm. "I trust you received our message." "Where is my son?" Audrey's voice was steady despite everything. "Safe, for now. But his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." "What do you want?" "I believe our note was quite clear. 10 million Swiss francs. You have 72 hours. "That's an enormous sum. I don't have that kind of liquid cash." The caller laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Miss Hepburn, we've done our research. Your film earnings, your investments, your real estate holdings. You're worth considerably more than 10 million. Liquidate what you need to liquidate." "And if I pay, how do I know you'll release him?" "You don't. But you know what happens if you don't pay, or if you involve the authorities. We have people everywhere, Miss Hepburn. Police, banks, government officials. If we suspect you've contacted law enforcement, your son dies. If you try to trace this call, he dies. If you deviate from our instructions in any way, he dies." The line went dead. Audrey sat in the silence of her drawing room, surrounded by the life she'd built with such careful attention to privacy and security. The irony was devastating. Her fame had made her a target. Her wealth had made her son valuable. Her desire to protect her family had isolated them in a place where no one could hear them scream. But the men who'd taken Sean had made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that Audrey Hepburn was just another wealthy actress who would pay quietly to avoid scandal. They'd assumed that her elegant, refined public image meant she would be easily intimidated. They'd assumed that a woman who'd built her career on playing vulnerable characters would be vulnerable herself. They'd never bothered to research who Audrey Hepburn really was. The woman who'd survived the Nazi occupation of Holland as a child, who'd carried messages for the Dutch resistance while bombs fell around her, who'd watched her neighbors disappear in the night and learned to hide food when there was no food to hide, who'd faced down Hollywood studio executives, aggressive directors, and predatory men in positions of power, who'd looked a Las Vegas mobster in the eye and made him beg for forgiveness. Instead of reaching for her checkbook, Audrey Hepburn reached for her phone. But she didn't call the police. She didn't call the Swiss authorities. She didn't call her lawyers or her business managers or anyone who might be expected to help in a situation like this. She called someone the Russian Mafia would never see coming. "Renee, it's Audrey. I need your help." René Mathieu was a name most people had never heard. He'd kept it that way deliberately. During World War II, he'd been one of the most effective operatives in the French resistance, specializing in sabotage and intelligence gathering. After the war, he'd transitioned into private security, working exclusively for clients who needed problems solved, quietly and permanently. He was also Audrey's oldest friend in Switzerland, a man who'd helped her purchase her estate and who'd been quietly ensuring her family's security for years. "What's happened?" René's voice was immediately alert. Audrey explained everything. The missing son, the ransom note, the phone call, the threats. René listened without interrupting, asking only occasional clarifying questions. "Bratva," he said when she finished. "Russians. Probably operating out of Geneva or Zurich, using Swiss banking laws to launder their money. Professional but arrogant. They think Switzerland's neutrality makes them untouchable. Can you help me?" "Audrey, these people are extremely dangerous. If they realize you're not following their instructions..." "They have my son, René, my 16-year-old son. I'm not paying 10 million francs to criminals who will probably kill him anyway." Hit subscribe if you want to see how this unfolds. It gets even more intense. There was a long pause. Then, "Give me 12 hours. Don't do anything. Don't contact anyone. Don't respond to any calls from them. I need to make some inquiries. René, I only have 72 hours. Trust me." The next 12 hours were the longest of Audrey's life. She sat in her drawing room, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring with news of Sean or another call from his captors. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything except imagine the worst. When René finally called back, his voice carried a tone she'd never heard before. Excitement mixed with something that sounded like anticipation. "I found them," he said simply. "Where's Sean?" "Safe. They're holding him in a warehouse outside Geneva. 4 guards rotating shifts. The operation is run by a man named Dmitry Volkov. He's been using Switzerland as a base for kidnapping wealthy targets across Europe. Your son isn't his first victim. How many others? 7 in the past 18 months. 3 paid the ransom and got their family members back. 4 refused or couldn't pay." "What happened to the 4 who couldn't pay?" René's silence was answer enough. "What do you need me to do?" Audrey asked. "Nothing. This stops tonight." "René, you can't just..." "Shh. Audrey, listen to me. These men have killed children. They've destroyed families. They've been operating in our country, targeting our people because they think we're soft. They think our laws protect them. They're about to learn they're wrong." "How many people are you talking about? How many men?" "Enough. Some friends from the old days. Men who remember what it was like when fascists thought they could terrorize innocent people without consequences." "René, I don't want you to do anything illegal." "What's illegal? We're going to recover stolen property and rescue a kidnapped child. If the kidnappers resist, well, that's unfortunate for them." The line went quiet again. "Audrey, in 2 hours, I need you to call the number they gave you. Tell them you're ready to pay, that you'll have the money by tomorrow afternoon. Keep them focused on the ransom while we handle the rest. And Sean? We'll be home for breakfast." That night, while Audrey paced her drawing room and waited for news, René Mathieu and 12 men who'd once fought Nazis assembled in a farmhouse outside Geneva. They weren't professional mercenaries or government agents. They were businessmen, shop owners, retirees who'd served their country during its darkest hour and who'd never forgotten what it meant to protect innocent people from predators. They were also very good at what they did. The warehouse where Sean was being held was supposed to be impregnable. Thick walls, limited access points, armed guards with military training, the kind of place where even police would hesitate to stage a rescue operation. But the men surrounding it that night hadn't learned urban warfare from textbooks. They'd learned it in the streets of occupied France, fighting an enemy that had seemed invincible until proven otherwise. The operation took 17 minutes. By the time the sun rose over Lake Geneva, Dmitry Volkov and his entire organization had simply vanished. Not killed. That would have created complications. Not arrested. That would have involved authorities who might ask uncomfortable questions. They'd been deported. Quietly, efficiently, permanently. Loaded onto a cargo plane bound for Moscow with instructions never to return to Western Europe. Their assets had been frozen. Their safe houses had been raided. Their network of contacts had been compromised. And Sean Ferrer was sitting at his mother's breakfast table, eating eggs and telling her about his adventure with the kind of excitement that only 16-year-old boys can manage when they've survived something genuinely dangerous. They weren't very smart, Sean said between bites. They kept arguing about the plan, and they kept checking their watches like they were worried about something. Then around midnight, there was this commotion outside, and suddenly these men in tactical gear were everywhere. Were you afraid? Audrey asked, still not quite believing he was safe. At first, but then I saw Renee and I knew everything was going to be okay. He said to tell you that the problem has been permanently resolved. The phone rang. Audrey answered cautiously. Miss Hepburn? It was the same voice that had called with the ransom demand, but now it sounded different, shaky, desperate. Yes? There's been a misunderstanding about your son. We're prepared to release him immediately. No payment required. We just need assurance that there will be no retaliation. Audrey looked at Sean, safe and whole at her breakfast table. No retaliation will be necessary, she said calmly. The matter is resolved. Thank you. And Miss Hepburn, we apologize for any inconvenience. The caller hung up. Audrey never heard from them again. 2 weeks later, Renee visited for tea. He seemed relaxed, satisfied, like a man who'd completed a particularly difficult project. Any word on our friends from Geneva? Audrey asked. They've returned to Moscow. Permanently. Along with a very clear understanding that Switzerland is no longer available for their business operations. And the other victims, the families they targeted, compensated, anonymously, from certain assets that were recovered during the operation. Audrey poured tea, her hands steady. Renee, I need to ask you something. Of course. How did you know I wouldn't just pay the ransom? Most people would have paid. Renee smiled. Because I knew who you really are. Not Audrey Hepburn, the actress. Audrey Hepburn, the woman who survived the war, who carried messages for the resistance when she was younger than Sean, who learned that sometimes the only way to stop bullies is to show them that their victims aren't as helpless as they assumed. But the risk was calculated. These men were predators, Audrey. They'd already killed children. If you'd paid the ransom, Sean might have come home, but they'd have taken other people's children. They'd have continued operating, continued destroying families until someone stopped them. So we stopped them. The story never made the newspapers. No reports of kidnapping, no mention of missing Russian criminals, no dramatic rescue operations. Switzerland's reputation for discretion and neutrality remained intact. But in certain circles, among people who dealt with international security issues, word spread. The Russian Mafia had tested Swiss resolve by targeting a beloved international figure. They'd discovered that Switzerland's peaceful facade concealed something much more dangerous. A network of men who'd once fought fascists, and who retained both the skills and the willingness to protect innocent people from predators, regardless of what passport those predators carried. Sean Ferrer finished his education in Switzerland without further incident. He went on to become a successful businessman and philanthropist, eventually running the Audrey Hepburn Children's Fund. He never spoke publicly about his kidnapping, but he never forgot the lesson it taught him about the importance of standing up to bullies. Audrey continued her UNICEF work, traveling the world to help children in need. She was never targeted again. Word had gotten out, through channels that governments and criminal organizations both monitored, that Audrey Hepburn was under the protection of people who didn't negotiate with kidnappers. They eliminated them. Years later, when Sean was an adult with children of his own, he asked his mother why she hadn't just paid the ransom. Because, Audrey told him, paying bullies doesn't make them go away. It just teaches them that bullying works. And I didn't want any other mother to go through what I went through those 2 days when I thought I'd lost you. But you risked my life by not paying, Audrey smiled. I risked your life by bringing you into a world where predators think they can take whatever they want from anyone they choose. The only way to keep you truly safe was to make sure those particular predators couldn't threaten anyone ever again. And if Renee's plan had failed, then I would have paid the ransom and spent the rest of my life making sure they regretted taking my son. The kidnapping of Sean Ferrer became one of the most effective crime deterrents in Swiss history, though hardly anyone knew it had happened. For the next 2 decades, organized crime groups planning operations in Switzerland would receive warnings from their intelligence networks. Stay away from certain targets. Some people had friends who didn't play by conventional rules. Audrey Hepburn's name was always at the top of those lists, not because she was famous or wealthy, but because she'd proven that elegance and refinement could coexist with absolute ruthlessness when it came to protecting the people she loved. And because sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who look like they couldn't hurt a fly, until they prove otherwise. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.